Hello, everybody. Kristal here at the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles and Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia, teaming up with Melissa Talwar, the founder of Support Fibromyalgia Network, and we are bringing you an informational video series to help you better understand legislative advocacy and learn some tips and tricks to be successful with your legislative advocacy efforts. But you don't have to take my word for it, because I've brought in some colleagues and experts on the topic. And today's guest is Michael Hartley, the president of Swing State Strategies. He has a background as a communication advisor and campaign strategist, and he has also done legislative advocacy from both a professional and personal perspective. Michael, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I am looking so forward to all the information you're going to share. And I feel that one of the most powerful ways to connect with people and help them better understand is by sharing our personal stories. And you have a very interesting story, both professionally and then personally. So would you mind filling us in on your experiences with legislative advocacy from both a professional and personal standpoint?
Okay, not a problem. Kristal, thank you very much for having me on. It's good to see you again. It's been a long time, and as former college friends back in the won't say the year, we are. Let me go ahead and kind of start with the idea that professionally how it kind of started. So I started doing kind of political work back in 1998. And that kind of led into doing a bunch of things. Basically, for about 15 years, I worked strictly in the political and government world, both as a campaign operative and a government official. Worked on races that from the Ohio Attorney General and Auditor to U.S. Congress to the presidential elections to my final one was governor of Ohio race. So did all that, and then climbed the wall and escaped into the private sector. I'd kind of gotten at the policy and political work, and now I wanted to expand it to more of a understanding the corporate world, because at one time I actually wanted to be a lobbyist. I thought that was a good idea. The narrator will say he did not become a lobbyist. But from my perspective, I went in the corporate world and did lobby from the corporate perspective. Well, during that time, actually, I'll back up a little bit. So my son was diagnosed when I went into the governor's office in 2011. My son was diagnosed with autism. He's 4 years old. And I'd literally just worked and worked and worked for so long. And it was time, I made me kind of step back, say, okay, I need to focus on family and such. So that's what precipitated me actually leaving politics and government as an operative. So I went in, and then when our son was diagnosed, I was in the corporate world. And I had, very close relationships with obviously the governor, but pretty much all the elected officials on the Republican side of the aisle, and really got, I was pretty quiet about my son, because it was just such a gut punch you have as a parent. Now I understand it was a blessing. The journey has been incredible for my wife and I, but when I got to the point, I actually got reached out to by a legislator who knew, not a lot of people knew, they kept it I just kept private, and that's how I am, but said, hey, there's a bill that would bring mandate insurance coverage for autism, which believe it or not, wasn't the case. The insurances weren't required to cover therapy for children with autism. They had covered every other kind of healthcare. We call it healthcare parity. They cover pretty much everything except autism, because it's very expensive to treat with therapy. So I got reached out to, and it was like, all right, I'll I'll do it. I'll tell my story. And I, the relationships I had in the legislature, in the governor's office, as well as in the media, I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. So I pretty much, kind of dove in and testified. That's the when you get in front of the legislative committees and you tell your story and you answer questions and everything else. Now, I had known pretty much everybody there. And the interesting thing was that it took 5 years to get it passed. And there was an awful lot of my friends who I had, had in my house or walked in their parades. They had met my son, who were not supportive, and it was discouraging and angering and everything else. But there, along with that, came all these other families, and we kind of over those 5 years really put together an effort that got, we created a critical mass, and that'll be something I'll kind of touch on, I think, a little bit later. But we created a critical mass where the support was there, and it just had to get done. And ultimately it did in December of 2016. We were able to get the healthcare parity passed. So that's kind of my background. I may have gone a little long-winded, but I think it gives you a good idea of professionally what I do. And I still do the stuff I do professionally, but it kind of gives you the idea of I didn't look for this. It was kind of brought upon me. I just had a very unique background that allowed me to utilize what I've done professionally, personally.
Right. And just to kind of cue in on, my background is I worked, I was in the military, so there's that aspect, but I worked in social services for 20 years, and that included working with individuals, mostly adults, that were diagnosed with autism or other intellectual disabilities and mental health. And, in the earlier years, I was at our state capitol and our national capitol advocating for some basically word changes for IDEA. And because I felt that, even though I did not have someone I was related to with autism, I worked with individuals with autism. I had friends that had children with autism. And I felt that at the time when that first was rolling out, it really didn't cast a big enough net to ensure that children with autism were going to receive all the supports they needed in school. So, and when you go on this advocacy path, 9 times out of 10, you go on that journey because someone that has, a condition or diagnosis that you're passionate about, just like fibromyalgia. I've always been a compassionate and sensitive person. I grew up with a brother who had leukemia and then later developed cardiomyopathy. And so I was very passionate about a lot of causes, but I did not obviously advocate for fibromyalgia because I wasn't diagnosed with it yet. And then once I went through that whole gamut of misdiagnoses and all this crazy stuff and tried this treatment, it didn't work, this made it worse. Then I realized, I was like, you know what? I have a voice and I have a story. And you use the word testimony, and that word can maybe scare some people. And I like to say, it's a testimonial, really. Yes, it's testimony, but it's a testimonial of your experience, your story, which is going to be the most compelling that our, political leaders will hear, or legislative leaders will hear, because you're telling your first person perspective of how a situation or a medical condition or having a son with autism, you're bringing a first person perspective. And that is the most compelling testimonial that I feel there is. And I know myself, and you've known me for many years, and I never, I'm not quiet about things. And I give people a hard time, jokingly a lot of times, but other times seriously. And I felt like, okay, I have a voice. I have a lot of professional experience behind me. I am a total research nerd. So I will research something until there's nothing left to research to become my own expert so that I can become a voice and then start advocating to make changes. And as you pointed out earlier, it didn't happen overnight. It took some years, and that is typical. And the other thing, though, a little kind of caveat, I want to go back. So, I mean, you had your relationships established with those who identified as Republican, but did you feel you kind of had to start over or start anew or a little bit more at the beginning of your advocacy with those who did not identify as Republican, like your independents that are, you know, in Congress and Democrats and whatnot? Did you feel like you had to be outreaching them more often than their Republican counterparts?
No, well, from my perspective, no. In my instance, now also understand, I kind of knew everybody because the what I did for a living, I just knew even Democrats and had relationships with them because you want to whatever the policy is, you want to have it be of a bipartisan nature. At least back 10 years ago, that's the way we thought. But seriously though, so I did have the relationship, but I will say it is, you have to, it is, to kind of get to a larger point, not just myself, but if you're going to be an advocate for whatever cause, it's you have to build that relationship with not only the legislator, usually it starts with the staff first, right? You have to create that, and you have to be genuine. You can't be, you can't bring BS, right? You have to really be genuine in what you're doing. And obviously, in my role and what you've done in this issue, fibromyalgia or autism, there's a seriousness to it, but there's also, people don't make up these things. Like it is a, they know that you're legitimate coming in there, particularly if you're either you or a family member is affected by it. So, if you're, and I think you're kind of getting to this a little bit of how to kind of start, building that relationship. And I'll kind of go from there, and you can re-ask the question however you want. But the idea of going in, and if it's even at your local level, now usually in this, what things we're talking about are going to be at the state and national level, because those are the folks that can influence everything versus local. And so, you go in there and you tell your story, you have the conversation, and the idea, what your idea is, what you're trying to do, you start, we call it in the old days, we called it a vote count, right? You start, it takes time. You have to go through. There's 99 House members in the Ohio House and 33 in the Senate. It's a long time to go, right? That's a lot of meetings. And particularly in the world we live in now, it becomes all virtual, right? So you have to take your time. You have to understand it is going to take time. But my experience, particularly personally, professionally, it's a little bit more inside baseball type stuff, but personally, policymakers want to hear your story, and all you have to do is make the effort. And they're these policymakers, legislators. They're believe it or not, they're normal folks just like you and I. So it's not, you don't have to be intimidated by it. You just have to put in the work, make the effort, be respectful, answer their questions, tell your story, and be genuine. And that'll get you a heck of a long way.
I 100% agree. I find that, I like to use the word authentic, and some people are like, how are you authentic? And I'm like, just be you, tell your story. But pepper it with some facts, that gives them, I don't know if it's the right term, but kind of wow factor. It's you walk in or you're doing a virtual meeting and, I might pitch, well, we really need more funding to do research on fibromyalgia because it afflicts 2 to 4% of the world's population. And on top of that, being a veteran with fibromyalgia, there's even less treatments and options offered at the VA. And the misnomer is that all veterans go to the VA for healthcare, and that's not true. More than half, either 100% or part of their healthcare is in the interim. This lack of research to find the root cause and better treatment options, this is, compounding the suicide rates, and that I have friends that I've lost to suicide because of fibromyalgia and the chronic pain. And, chronic illness and chronic pain is like one of the top 5 reasons that someone, will die by suicide. So these are astronomical numbers that this crisis is being ignored. So, that's an example of, I have fibromyalgia. I'm also a veteran with fibromyalgia. Treatment options are limited. Funding isn't there to do research to address all these factors. And it's kind of like doing like a pitch. I often tell people that, which ties into one of the points that you've already started talking about, is, you want to build relationships, as best you can prior to going in full force or full throttle with that advocacy initiative, because at least they may have heard your name. At least you may have had that conversation with their staffer or with the Congress leader or with the senator. And then it's like, be authentic, be yourself, be knowledgeable, but also be personable. I'm one of those, I do kind of, I'll crack jokes after I say my spiel. I'm really big on observing the environment if it's in person, and picking up little things of the person that I think is cool. Like if they have something on their desk, like a knick-knack or something, and be like, oh, that's really awesome. Where'd you get that at? And then they tell you the story, and then all of a sudden you have a kismet connection because you invested a few seconds in getting to know them on a personal level by observing something. And it could be a picture of their family or whatnot. And so, yeah, that kind of ties in of the importance of trying to basically network and start establishing those relationships before moving forward with big advocacy legislative initiatives. You can do that, but I personally feel having network or relationships established makes it a little bit easier when you are doing virtual legislative meetings or walking the halls of Congress, that having some connections and some networks with some people that can make a difference, that can make or break a legislative initiative, I feel, is one of the most important steps to take when moving forward with legislative advocacy. And I'm sure both a professional and personal.
I was just going to say that one thing I kind of forgot as you go through this, as you kind of go through the process, the other thing you'll find is that you'll find your champions, right? You'll find the legislators and policymakers that are willing to be champions for your issue. And then from there, then they take it to their colleagues, and then they can help you say, hey, I need you to go tell your story to this legislator or that legislator or this, this policy director or whatever it is, right? And that's where and again, that's why you have to look at it. You never look at it in, when I always have whatever it is, work, an issue, I never look at it in its whole. I always try to break it up into small pieces and kind of it's easier. Okay, let's get this thing done, get this thing done, get this thing done. And I think that's the way you have to look at it with advocacy on your issues, whatever they are. And that whole process of the kind of getting to know and telling your story, then you stumble across folks that are not only, you'll say, hey, are supportive and want to be helpful, but those will be your champions. And those are the folks that will carry, an amendment or a piece of legislation or whatever it is that addresses your issue.
And it's so true because, with like fibromyalgia and like you said, with autism, just when you were starting your advocacy journey on behalf of your son and other individuals with autism, you really found out who was on your team, right? You were shocked to find that some people that are friends, family, colleagues that you've had and known for years, you might not hear from them again. Let's be honest. There's some that you probably have not heard from ever since then. There's always a couple of those. And then there's some they'll be like, oh man, you're such an inspiration, but yet they share a post to help promote awareness on your initiative on social media, or they don't call to say, hey, how's it going? Or is there something I can do to help? And then you start this journey and you meet a whole new world of people that get behind you. And then you start speaking with, you know, I'm one of those people, I mean, right now we're recording this in the midst of the COVID pandemic, so everything's virtual. I'm one of those people, though, I really enjoy getting out and networking and establishing relationships. And, you know, those little things, then they say, oh, I met her. Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, I didn't know she was into doing this type of stuff. I just thought she just gave a speech about what fibromyalgia was, and here she is. You know, she's behind, you know, legislation for fibromyalgia and legislation for, you know, to protect veterans, and those type of things that, you know, I found have been really great stepping stones for when I get in that door, or I'm having that either face to face or phone call or video, you know, meeting with someone that it struck a chord with them, and then they become your champion, and then they'll help you, maybe, you know, if it's something about drafting a bill, and they become the one to do that for you. And it helps you realize in that moment that, yes, they are people just like us. There's not an individual in Congress and Senate, not even our state governors, that have not been touched by some type of medical condition in their family. And that's one of the things that I talk about as well. And I say, you know, thank God I don't have kids, because I just don't know how this would impact them. And I see that you have children, and I couldn't imagine like what it would be like having a chronic illness and trying to manage parenting in children. It's hard enough as it is. And then when you commit, and sometimes just even acknowledging that they have kids and saying, I know it's hard and I can't imagine myself doing it because of X, Y, Z. And again, it's really just, it's talking to people, not freezing up and being like, oh my goodness, they have, you know, they have no magical powers. They have no magical wands. They put their pants on, you know, the same way as we all do, unless if you're me and I'm pulling them up and falling over because I have mobility issues sometimes. But, you know, that is the biggest thing, is breaking that stigma, as they are our equals. They're there to work for us, and they don't know what to do unless if we're talking to them and building the relationships.
And my, you know, in my experience, 20 plus years, you know, professionally and personally, they, you know, the vast majority of them want to help, and that's an opportunity, I think, for folks who are advocates of whatever issue it is.
I absolutely agree. And like, of course, some people will be watching this and they will say, well, I don't know. And both you and I can speak from personal experience saying, yeah, you know, this is true. It's kind of like, you know, with legislative advocacy or policy advocacy, it's almost like once you get your feet, you feel more comfortable. And I tell people, okay, you're going to speak with your state, you know, Congress leaders. Let's practice what you're going to say first, like 100 times. So that part, you got it down, and they'll help with those jitters. And then once you get past that, it's so much more easier. And, you know, I've noticed, like, for myself and other, like, advocates who have done legislative advocacy, once they got that foot in the door, once they got their feet wet, once they started networking and relationships, you know, down the road, a lot of times those conversations, you know, with our political leaders basically are conversational. It's not so stoic, or, you know, you get to know the people. They'll, you know, I'll have, like, my state representatives ask me how my dogs are because I'm friends with them on social media, or I've went to an event in person that was outdoors. I brought my dog, and they'll ask me about my dogs because they pay attention. They're people too. And it really, those little things really do help.
You know, one of the things that
as far as getting your feet wet.
Yeah, real quick. One of the things when you talk about, you know, how to help people kind of get over that hump of sometimes it just, they get nervous or they're, trying to get themselves where they feel comfortable talking to legislators is one of the things I did in the autism advocacy was, take another parent with me, take somebody else who wanted to be involved, but, having somebody that has experience partnering up with somebody that may not. And therefore it allows the person that hasn't been in a legislative meeting to kind of see how it goes. And they'll be kind of quiet, but they observe it and they see how it goes. And then, you kind of bring them in. Like I would always kind of, they're sitting next to me, but then I would say, Dorina, can you, and I'll use for example, Dorina, can you tell your story about your son? And, then you kind of see the tension and nervousness melt away. And that's a good concept, for anybody that's looking to do it. If you can, if you can have the bandwidth to have, two people, one that has some experience, and one that may be new to the scene, always try to, I always suggest going in twos anyway. But that is a good avenue to help, whatever the issue is you're talking about, somebody that is, kind of can lead the meeting from your perspective, but then the other person can, kind of fill in and be brought in and tell their story until they get comfortable. And then, after a few meetings, then they'll be the ones that are taking, their counter, their colleagues or their, the person that's suffering from whatever, bring them in. So that's how you kind of grow the effort and ultimately reach that critical mass where you have, an army of advocates for whatever issue, going over at the state. I mean, we've had, as many as 200, folks in the State House in blue shirts, talking about, autism coverage but that took time to build because you have to get folks comfortable. Right. So that's just a bit of advice from my experience that I think is helpful to kind of get folks over that hump.
I think that's a really good piece that you brought forward, and you used, the term Army, and I was in the Army, and basically another term we use in the Army is battle buddy. So when you're going in and doing legislative advocacy, have a battle buddy. If you're not, if you're nervous or if you're newer to this aspect, yes, team up, definitely. And with the fibromyalgia community, we stress so much the importance of coming together and being one voice. And this is an example as to why, because some are shy, some don't have the experience. And that's why another reason why it's important to have a battle buddy or your backup or that lead person who's going to help you break the ice much easier so that you can share your story, because everyone's story is important. It's because of people's stories and personal experiences that have brought about positive changes for, a variety of communities, autism, fibromyalgia, veterans, pick a community. And if it wasn't for people teaming up and working as partners on, the same initiative, you really wouldn't see as much change that there has been. And a lot of people think, it takes forever or they're not listening. And it's kind of like, well, that's our job, is to get them to listen and figuring out how we're going to get them to listen, and coming up with our game plan and working together and collaborating together and being that person, if you have the experience, to lift others up in the situation. Because I'm a big on that. I love lifting people up. I love showcasing people. And especially when it comes to legislative advocacy, it's so important to team up. And like you said, become an army, be each other's battle buddies. And that's one tool or a good practice that you brought up when it comes to advocating for, legislation. Do you have any other tools or best practices that you have found yourself helpful, either personally or professionally, or your colleagues have found helpful and successful that you wouldn't mind sharing with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And understand, I've been, in my professional world, I've been on the inside and the outside. So I've not only lobbied, but I have been lobbied. So it's a unique perspective. So I can give you a little bit of background. I think it's, know what you're going to say. Like it's very important to go in there and usually, the KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid thing. That is, keep it brief, keep it to the point. Tell a little bit about yourself, but I'm normally like this anyway. I'm just kind of kind of wired this way where I'm very to the point and not a lot of, BS, right? So I think that's it. Understand that when you're meeting with somebody, policymaker, legislator, it's usually a 15 to 30-minute meeting. So you have to get yourself, and you have to allow them to ask questions, right? Don't go in there and just bleh, right? You gotta talk in kind of segments, talking, kind of like kind of like you're asking me a question, I answer it. And then you ask me another question, I answer, right? So you kind of, you go about that way. So be structured, be knowledgeable, but be personable, tell your own story. A lot of it with these folks, they want to hear your own story. It's not, the talking points and the numbers, those are great. 1 in 59 children are affected by autism, 1 in 48 boys. Yeah. Well, all those different things. Those are great and those help. But it's a combination of the two. It's a combination of your story and the numbers and the facts. And if you can marry those two well in a very concise way, and then allow them to engage you, they'll ask you questions. It should never, these folks are just regular people. Never be afraid to get in a conversation, just like anybody else. Like you're at the grocery store and you strike up a conversation with a stranger. How do you get to become friends with people, right? You have conversations. And so that is, to me, is one of the things that a few of the things that I think are in my best practices. Schedule, like if you're going to do multiple meetings in a day, understand those can be mentally exhausting. That's just up here physically. If you have physical ailments, it takes it out of you too. Plan accordingly. Don't if you're going to do, hey, we're going to be at the State House for, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of this week, plan it accordingly. Don't, give yourself time from each meeting, between meetings to get where you need to go. Give yourself time to regroup after each meeting. You're not, again, there's 132 legislators in the Ohio legislature between the House and the Senate. You're not going to meet them all in one day. Take your time, do it, just do it systematically. Give yourself time. Know your limitations. Hell, and I've been doing this a long time, and I get burned out in a day. I'll come home and I'll be completely fried mentally. Physically, I'm fine. Mentally, completely out there because I've had so many, particularly in this world of Zoom. You can, as opposed to having 6 in-person meetings, I've had as many as 10 to 12 Zoom meetings. But those take a serious effect. So plan it out. That's be smart about it. Along with the other things that I kind of mentioned, I think those are the things that, and overall just be genuine, and you'll experience some very good meetings that will probably be fruitful. But don't my father used to always say, don't let the turkeys get you down. You will encounter not fun meetings. I won't say bad meetings, but you'll experience meetings where they don't go exactly how you thought they should or wanted them to. That's okay. That's normal, and don't, just because you have a bad meeting for whatever reason, if the policymaker, legislator is a jerk, that's okay. Move on and go to the next one.
I call those type of meetings like practice burner meetings. So, because I'm like, okay, oh well, on to the next. That was practice, and let me see what I can do to be more engaging with the person. But yeah, you brought up a lot of good points, which ties into everything that we said. Is you have to pace yourself so that you reduce the likelihood of mental exhaustion or physical exhaustion. And the other piece again is having someone with you, because you can play off each other and save your energy pennies or reserves. And, you want to have your story, but make sure you research so that you have some facts, or, with someone who loves research like me and is going to know all the facts like that, and run them off. And, also realize the thing is, our Congress and Senate leaders, by the end of the day, they're tired too. And that's why it's so important to be authentic and personable, because you could be the last person meeting with that legislator and they're exhausted. And I'm one of those people, I'm like, let's get up, let's get there early. Let's, if you're going to the state or you're going to the national capital to advocate, I'm one of those, I'm like, we need to be in line 30 minutes before it opens, because by the end of the day, everybody's tired. And I know I'm tired. And I also feel like the early bird gets the worm. And I think that also from my experience, getting on, connecting with them early, they recognize that. They recognize, because, I have some friends that are in Congress and they have told me that they, it might not seem like it, but they observe a lot and they notice which individuals and which groups are getting there early and hammering it out and are professional about it, but yet personable, or they'll recognize that lone wolf that is really trying to make changes, and they notice these things. Obviously right now, again, in light of the pandemic, a lot of things are virtual. But that's the other thing too. If I have any type of video conference meeting on Zoom or whatever, app or whatnot, I'm like jumping on 5 minutes early before the meeting starts, and those can see I'm there and waiting, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed virtually. But so yeah, those are very important tools that you've, really relayed. And it also goes to show the importance of being you and sharing with some facts.
Yep.
So, the other thing is a lot of advocates, and I see this across a variety of communities, and, they feel, and I know you have some experience, I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is you have some experience with proclamation requests.
Yeah, I do.
Is that correct?
And I do. Yeah, so
and there's a lot of confusion, especially the autism community. People live in a variety of different states. Same thing with fibromyalgia. So each state's requirement of like when you can apply, most states require it virtually now, like you're applying online. So here's a question, tapping into your, expertise is like, in the past, I would apply online for a proclamation request, but I would also send a letter outlining all the information, and like since we are both in the state of Ohio, outlining the impact of fibromyalgia on Ohio and whatnot, and at the end of the letter, that's full of facts and like how it would benefit and support and validate Ohioans living with fibromyalgia. At the end, I say, thank you for taking the time to consider my request that I submitted both online and, within the statement. So I don't know if my approach is correct or the best way. So from your experience, what helps improve the likelihood of a request for a proclamation to be approved by local or state officials?
Yeah, so a lot of it starts with timing. So you have to, so in the autism world, April is a very big month. April 2nd is World Autism Day, and April is World Autism Month. So that's when, that's when the show is. Believe it or not, the autism walks are scattered throughout the year. The one here in Columbus is done in the fall, but autism, worldwide, nationally is kind of April's the big thing. So first thing is time. You got to give them time to, don't wait until March to make the request. So, if you're asking for, and it may not be where you have an instance like that, where it's like, that April's the time and you want to have it, this proclamation done in April. But you got to, try to think about, okay, when do we want to have this proclamation by, and then work backwards from there and give them enough time. I always try 4 to 6 weeks. Now, I will say it's a little different on my end. I tend to have a lot of relationships with folks where it's a phone call and it just, it gets done. And so it's a little different. But when I was in the governor's office and ran the director of public liaison, which is has a bunch of departments under it, including constituent affairs, which is where all the proclamations came from in the governor's office. So it was always helpful. Now, I will say it's appreciated from the inside, because again, you're asking them to do something for you, right? So, give them as much lead time as possible. They're usually like, oh, you need this on Monday, and it's like Thursday. They're usually dealing with that stuff. So when you give them, plenty of time, and don't, send that letter, send the email, send a letter, call. And then if you don't hear back from them in a week, follow-up email, follow-up call. You don't need to redo the letter thing, because there's an internal process with pretty much every government agency on letters. But you continue, just bug them. Don't be shy about, the squeaky wheel, right? I mean, it's true. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. And so therefore, just, be persistent. Don't bug them, but be persistent. Allow them time to respond, and then go through it that way. And that's, from my perspective, and again, you're right, every state is different. Every location, like we do, even if you're looking for not just in the government world, but one of the things we do with autism is called Light It Up Blue. So you probably see, like in Cleveland, like the terminal tower will turn blue for April 2nd, and down here in Columbus, a bunch of corporations and buildings light it up blue. And so when you do that, it's same thing. You have to get the ask, there's a bureaucracy in everything. There's a bureaucracy in government, as we know, but there's also, the private sector corporate bureaucracy that occurs. You have to give people time to get done what you're asking them to do. So that's my biggest thing is kind of timeliness. Give them enough time, be persistent. You're the one asking them to do something for you, so be kind, and just continue, with those three things until you get it. And then usually, depending what your issue is, but something like fibromyalgia or something like autism, they're going to be usually pretty happy and pretty, amenable to the request. But it's a matter of just giving them time. That's the biggest thing. And even if you can, part of it is, what do you want the proclamation to say? And those are some points that they may follow up with you. That's when you got them, right? When they follow up with you and say, okay, well, here, what would you want to have in the proclamation? Those are things you can include in the letter. Those are things you include in an email, like little bullet points. But it's kind of those three things that are generally broad-based, helpful and useful to kind of get those things done at any level of government, particularly.
Right. So basically, you got to create a timeline. You have to follow your own timeline. Follow up proactively, not annoyingly. And of course, always be gracious. And even after, let's say, two things, because you brought up with autism and buildings and cities lighting up in blue. Last year for Fibromyalgia Awareness Day, I had some local cities that I reached out to, and owners of specific buildings, and asked them if they would light their building or their little downtown district in purple on May 12th. And I asked 12 cities, cast a big net. I ended up getting five cities to do it. And it was pretty cool to drive around and take pictures. But again, a lot of that was, I didn't wait until May 1st and asked. I asked starting in March. So a good weeks before, and I stayed in contact. I was a little like sleuth, and I would find out like, I wonder if the city's mayor's gonna be at this community event, and I would show up there and I'd start chit-chatting up, the mayor or the corporate business that owns this specific building. And like, oh yeah, and then they put that name with face, and then it becomes more tangible. Now I understand that that's not feasible in light of COVID, but again, just kind of reaching out, like you said, following up via phone, via email, and also a good point is outlining what this means for the state to do that proclamation, or a city to light up their towers or buildings with the awareness color, what and how much it's going to mean for the community, especially right now in light of COVID. So many communities are, they're feeling forgotten because they can't go out and go to these events that mean so much to them every year or a couple times a year. And that's another piece I'd like to add in, is that, letting, for lack of a better term, the powers to be know, whether it's your state governor or even local cities can do proclamations too, but letting them know, like, this is your way of acknowledging that you haven't forgotten your constituents or residents who are living with this condition, and that they've been so isolated and self-isolating for a year now, that for them to see you do this, like, it's really gonna let them know that you recognize them as well.
So I have a great, real quick. I have a great kind of follow, a couple other points of what you talked about that make me want to mention. So there's we kind of talked about getting to that point. Now, if they do it, there's something we called win the win, right? Which is thanking them. Thank you. Make sure you thank them, and if you can get more people do that, great. But then once a state, a city, a county, a state, once they do it once, then they're more likely to do it again. And so you asked 12 cities, 5 of them did it. So what I would do in that next year, when you're asking other cities light up, say, hey, we'd love you to join, these 5 cities that did this last year. We want you to be a part of this. And, that will, that could spur a call from, city B that didn't do it to city A saying, hey, you guys did this. What was the feel? Oh, they were great. We got a lot of positive feedbacks. It was a real, positive experience for us. And then they'll sign up. Always, guilt's not a bad thing, right? When it comes to this kind of thing, guilt is not a bad thing. If you can get cities to be like, oh, well, we should be doing that if they're doing it. Absolutely. And I'll give you so one other thing to kind of plays on that is, as you go through this, as they do it more and more and more, sorry, son's walking in. When you do it more and more and more, they have, like, Franklin County example, where Columbus is, they actually reach out to Autism Speaks Columbus now, saying, hey, we're doing we're going to do this thing in April at the commissioners meeting. What date works best for you guys? Like, they proactively reach out to us. So it's that is where, when you get to that point, that's where you want to be.
Boiling, right. And it all started with the squeaky wheel, and they want to keep oiling it. And the other thing is, use follow up and thank people, especially in this instance with legislative advocacy, requesting proclamations, asking cities to either light up, like, their buildings, or corporate business lighting up the building in the awareness color. And what I do is, and some people think it's kind of corny, but but that's just me, is what I have done in the past to thank them is I've sat down with a circle of people, like friends or family, and I'm like, okay, I need you to write this thank you letter. This is what you say, and I'm going to mail it for you. The other thing I do is I write out a certificate of appreciation for that entity, whether it's, the city, the mayor, the governor, a legislative, leader in Congress or Senate. And honestly, it kind of seems a little I don't know, kitschy or corny to do that, but I've received a lot of feedback that they've never received from a constituent, like a certificate of appreciation. You could pick up a pack of them at any like office related store, order them online. But I feel like, okay, you want the distance for me and I want to show you my appreciation and, you know, a certificate of appreciation for recognizing fibromyalgia on May 12th, presented by Kristal Kent of the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles and Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia. And then they'll go online on social, because they do look us up, you know, and they'll be like, whoa, she's got like 20,000 followers on her webpage. And I was like, yeah, so, you know, not that that's that big of a deal, but it shows like where I'm like extending this gratitude, because what you did not just affect me, but it affected my social media community as well in a positive way, and that you made a difference, and it means a lot. So those are, you know, some of the things I do. I don't know, as far as like the way I'm doing it, thanking people and following up, the best approach, but I feel like it's better than nothing. And but it's also what you're comfortable with. Some people are more comfortable and receptive to calling and having that conversation, thanking them personally. I like to do, I don't know, when people send me cards and stuff, I keep them. I have a memory box, so that's why I do the card thing and everything. So to each their own. Unless if you have a better idea, and please tell me if my idea and what I do is corny, because I'll totally switch it, do something else.
There's nothing corny about it. It's corny's good in this case, and all the above, everything that you mentioned. Yes, you know, what's the, you know, which ones? Yes, that's my answer to it. They're all good. However, your best, you know, postcard, certificate, you know, appreciation, the, you know, phone call, whatever it is, social media posts, all of it is good and all of it matters and all of it is appreciated by those that, and, you know, highlight the people. Like if you're doing social media is a you know, well, it, you know, it can be the bane of our existence as a society. It's still very good to utilize to get a message out. And, you know, like with me, I always make it a point to highlight those policymakers or leaders, legislators, elected officials who have gone above and beyond, and those who just, you know, I mean, even, you know, when we've gotten legislation passed, I went through every single, yes, I'm, you know, personally went through every single legislator that voted yes on the legislation and thanked them on social media and tagged them on it. You know, those type of things. Every little bit matters and it's appreciated by them.
100%, I agree. And I do that as well, that I, you know, am linked to or friends with different congressional leaders within the state of Ohio and a couple other states. And there have been times where, the interesting thing is there have been times where I've thanked them for certain things, and then they'll see something that I post. And they'll say, "Oh my goodness, this needs to be addressed." Like, not too recent, but recently, I put out a call to action on social media regarding a bill to protect female veterans and female employees who are accessing, and visitors, female visitors accessing veteran healthcare facilities, because research found that 1 out of 4 female veterans in one way or another were being sexually harassed, sexually accosted, and even sexually assaulted. And one of my representatives saw that post and was like, I'm pushing this all the way up through the state of Ohio. Like, this isn't acceptable. And that is the power of starting relationships early on, because they, you know, they you end up building rapport, and they will pay attention to you down the road, whether in person, or they'll see what you're putting out on social media. And they're like, wow, that's an important issue. And even though you didn't necessarily reach out to that person, once they know who you are, you've built that rapport, and they see what you're doing to be a positive agent of change, they pay attention, and then they independently put a hand out to lift it up and help with different legislative actions that need to be taken care of. And I've had that experience as well. And again, it all goes back to building that relationship, following up, being genuine, authentic, being persistent or proactive, and then following up and thanking every person that has supported you along the way. And it opens so many, doors down the road. And it all starts with just that one step forward, putting that foot in the water and get started. Because guess what? I started back without having any experience, and it was very overwhelming. But I kind of figured my first couple of times out doing legislative or policy advocacy, I was like, this is my way to practice. And so the third or fourth time, I'll be better. And the fifth and sixth time, I'll be better. And then the 10th year from now, it'll be like second nature, and I could do it in my sleep. So, and that's the key component that we've highlighted throughout, is really networking, establishing those relationships, constant follow through, and being personable and sharing your story and facts. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I think Kristal, I really think we covered a ton on this. And again, I really appreciate you asking me to be a part of this, and hoping I've been helpful to folks. It's, I often say it's not, anything I've done is not rocket science. It's just, a lot of it is just being genuine and being kind and being a little strategic. And that's it. And I think we covered kind of everything I could possibly think of. But again, I've really enjoyed catching up, and it's good to see you again. It's been a while.
Likewise. And I truly appreciate your insight, the information you shared, and just really the importance of just go out there and do it. Be personal, authentic, and you can make positive changes. So for everybody tuning in, please make sure you follow Michael Hartley on social media at Swing State Strategies, along with Support Fibromyalgia Network on both Facebook and Instagram. And if you found this video helpful and beneficial, please like and share. And until next time, make your self-care your number one priority. Love yourselves and love each other. Go team.